Coming at you live from the beautiful heartland of these good old United States of America. Right at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and the majestic Missouri rivers, St. Charles, Missouri. This is the Rant. I am your host, Charles Lamson. Being with you for the next 2 hours. Let's see here. Oh, what's going on? Today is Wednesday, September the 18th, the year of our Lord, 2019. Today's topic, Part 5 of Leading Human Resources. First half of the big show, I'm going to be utilizing the Tibetan bull music as an occult device to summon forth the spirit of Alfred Marshall from the dead. And we're going to have a little seance. And he's going to share with us his principles of economics via a very talented group of mediums that I've been relying on throughout this whole presentation. So we're going to be doing that the first half. Alfred Marshall is going to share some ideas with us during these times of great uncertainty and economic uncertainty and turmoil and whatnot. So, practicing black magic, necromancy for the good of mankind, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so I'm going to be doing that the first half of the show. Second half, I'm going to close the seance. I'm going to send Alfred Marshall's soul back to hell. And then I'm going to be talking about management. We're going to be talking about leading human resources, management tips, management strategies. Very useful information, but not just for management and organizational communication. Really good, sound communication advice for just life in general, working within any organization, say church, community group, family, your own little peer friend structure, your baseball team, whatever, softball team, what have you. Okay, so then we're going to be doing that. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's see if we... Alfred, can you hear us, please? Share with us your principles of economics. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I know some of the people may not sound like Alfred Marshall. He was English, so but you got to consider he's speaking to us through a team of mediums. So, okay, here we go. Alfred Marshall. Are you there, please?
Alterations in the real net rent required of the tenants are as often made by a quiet readjustment of the shares of the expenses of working the firm that are borne by the landlord and the tenant as by a change in the money rents. Thus, corporate bodies and many large private landowners often let their tenants go on from year to year without any attempt to make the money rents follow the changes in the real letting value of the land. And there are many farms which are not let on lease, and yet the rent of which has nominally remained unchanged during the agricultural inflation, which culminated in 1874, and during the depression which followed. But in the earlier period, the farmer, who knew he was under-rented, could not put pressure on his landlord to lay out capital in drainage or new buildings, or even in repairs, and had to humor him as regards the gain and in other matters. While just now, the landlord, who has a steady tenant, will do many things that are not stipulated for in the agreement in order to retain him. Thus, while the money rent has remained stationary, the real rent has changed. This fact is an important illustration of the general proposition that the economic theory of rent, the Ricardian theory as it is sometimes called, does not apply to modern English land tenure without many corrections and limitations, both as regards substance and form, and that a further extension of these corrections and limitations will make the theory applicable to all forms of medieval and oriental land tenure, in which any sort of private ownership is recognized. The difference is only one of degree. 3. But the difference of degree is very great. This is partly because in primitive times and backward countries, the sway of custom is more undisputed. Partly because in the absence of scientific history, short-lived man has little better means of ascertaining whether custom is quietly changing than the fly, born today and dead tomorrow, has of watching the growth of the plant on which it rests. But the chief reason is that the conditions of partnership were expressed in terms which were seldom capable of exact definition and measurement. For the share of the senior partner in the farm, or the landlord as we may for shortness call him, generally included, parenthesis begins, either with or without a right to a certain share of the produce, parenthesis closes, the right to claim certain labor services and dues, tolls and presents, and the amount which he obtained under each of those heads varied from time to time, from place to place, and from one landlord to another. Whenever payments of all kinds made by the cultivator left him a margin beyond the necessaries of life for him and his family, together with those comforts and luxuries which were established by custom, the landlord was likely to use his superior strength to raise the payments in some form or other. If the chief payments were a certain share of the produce, he might increase that share. But as that could seldom be done without an appearance of violence, he would be more likely to increase the number and weight of his minor imposts, or to insist that the land be more intensively cultivated and a larger part of it be given to crops that cost much labor and are of great value. Thus, changes went on smoothly for the most part, silently and almost imperceptibly, like the hour hand of a clock. But in the long run, they were very thorough. Note 108. The protection which custom afforded to the tenant was not indeed unimportant, even as regards these dues, for he always knew pretty well what demands he would have to meet at any particular time. The moral sense of all around him, high and low, protested against any attempt on the part of his landlord to make a sudden and violent increase in the payments and dues, the tolls and fines which were recognized as usual, and thus custom rounded off the edges of change. It is moreover true that these vague and variable elements of rent were generally but a small part of the whole, and that in those not very rare cases in which the money rent remained fixed for very long periods together, the tenant had a kind of partnership in the soil, which he owed partly to the forbearance of his landlord, if it happened that the true net value of the land had risen, but partly also to the constraining force of custom and public opinion. This force, in some measure, resembled the force which holds raindrops on the lower edge of a window frame. The repose is complete till the window is violently shaken, and then they fall together, and in like way, the legal rights of the landlord, which had long lain latent, were sometimes brought suddenly into action in a period of great economic change. Note 109. 4. The question whether the payments made by the cultivator for the use of his land should be reckoned in money or in produce is of growing interest with reference to both India and England. But we may pass it by for the present and consider the more fundamental distinction between the English system of rental and that of holding land on shares, as it is called in the New World, or the Metaya. Note 110, system, as it is called in the Old. In a great part of Latin Europe, the land is divided into holdings, which the tenant cultivates by the labor of himself and his family, and sometimes, though rarely, that of a few hired laborers, and for which the landlord supplies buildings, cattle, and sometimes even farm implements. In America, there are few agricultural tenancies of any kind, but 2/3 of those few are small holdings let out to white men of the poorer class or to freed Negroes on some plan by which labor and capital share in the produce. Note 111. This plan enables a man who has next to no capital of his own to obtain the use of it at a lower charge than he could in any other way, and to have more freedom and responsibility than he would as a hired laborer. And thus, the plan has many of the advantages of the three modern systems of cooperation: profit sharing and payment by piecework. Note 112. But though the Metaya has more freedom than the hired laborer, he has less than the English farmer. His landlord has to spend much time and trouble, either of his own or of a paid agent, in keeping the tenant to his work, and he must charge for these a large sum, which, though going by another name, is really earnings of management. For when the cultivator has to give to his landlord half of the returns to each dose of capital and labor that he applies to the land, it will not be to his interest to apply any doses, the total return to which is less than twice enough to reward him. If then he is free to cultivate as he chooses, he will cultivate far less intensively than on the English plan. He will apply only so much capital and labor as will give him returns more than twice enough to repay himself, so that his landlord will get a smaller share even of those returns than he would have on the plan of a fixed payment. This is the case in many parts of Europe in which the tenant has practical fixity of tenure, and then it is only by constant interference that the landlord can keep up the amount of labor he puts on his farm and keep down the use he makes of the farm cattle for outside work, the fruits of which he does not share with his landlord. But even in the most stationary districts, the amount and quality of the stock which custom requires the landlord to provide are being constantly, though imperceptibly, modified to suit the changing relations of demand and supply. And if the tenant has no fixity of tenure, the landlord can deliberately and freely arrange the amount of capital and labor supplied by the tenant and the amount of capital supplied by himself to suit the exigencies of each capital of each special case. Note 114. It is obvious then that the advantages of the Metier system are considerable when the holdings are very small, the tenants poor, and the landlords not averse to taking much trouble about small things, but that it is not suitable for holdings large enough to give scope to the enterprise of an able and responsible tenant. It is commonly associated with the system of peasant proprietorship, and we may consider that next. 5. The position of a peasant proprietor has great attractions. He is free to do what he likes. He is not worried by the interference of a landlord and the anxiety lest another should reap the fruits of his work and self-denial. His feeling of ownership gives him self-respect and stability of character and makes him provident and temperate in his habits. He is scarcely ever idle and seldom regards his work as mere drudgery. It is all for the land that he loves so well. The magic of property turns sand into gold, said Arthur Young. It undoubtedly has done so in many cases in which the proprietors have been men of exceptional energy. But such men might perhaps have done as well or better if their horizon had not been limited to the narrow hopes of a peasant proprietor. For indeed, there is another side to the picture. Land, we are told, is the best savings bank for the working man. Sometimes it is the second best. But the very best is the energy of himself and his children. and the peasant proprietors are so intent on their land that they often care for little else. Many, even of the richest of them, stint the food of themselves and their families. They pride themselves on the respectability of their houses and furniture, but they live in their kitchens for economy and are practically worse housed and far worse fed than the better class of English cottagers. And the poorest of them work hard during very long hours, but they do not get through much work because they feed themselves worse than the poorest English laborers. They do not understand that wealth is useful only as a means towards a real income of happiness. They sacrifice the end to the means. Note 115. And it must be recollected that the English laborers represent the failure rather than the success of the English system. They are the descendants of those who for many successive generations have not availed themselves of the opportunities by which their abler and more adventurous neighbors were rising to leading posts at home. And what is far more important, we are acquiring the fee simple of a great part of the surface of the globe. Of the causes which have contributed to make the English race the chief owners of the New World, the most important is that bold enterprise which has made a man who is rich enough to be a peasant proprietor generally refuse to be content with the humdrum life and the narrow income of a peasant. And among the causes which have fostered this enterprise, none is more important than the absence of the temptations to wait about for a petty inheritance and to marry for the sake of property rather than in the free exercise of individual choice. Temptations which have often dulled the energy of youth in places in which peasant properties have predominated. It is partly in consequence of the absence of these temptations that the farmers of America, though they are men of the working class, cultivating their own land with their own hands, do not resemble peasant proprietors. They invest their income freely and wisely in developing the energies of themselves and their children. And these energies constitute the chief part of their capital, for their land generally is as yet of but little value. Their minds are always active, and though many of them have little technical knowledge of agriculture, their acuteness and versatility enable them to find out almost unerringly the best solution of the problem immediately before them. That problem is generally to obtain a produce large in proportion to the labor spent on it, though small in proportion to the abundant land at their disposal. In some parts of America, however, in which land is beginning to get a scarcity value, and in which the immediate neighborhood of good markets is making an intensive cultivation profitable, the methods of farming and of tenure are rearranging themselves on the English model. And within the last few years, there have been signs of a tendency on the part of Native Americans to hand over to persons of recent European origin the farms of the West, as they have already done the farms of the East, and as they did long ago the textile industries. 6. Let us then turn to that English system of tenure. It is faulty and harsh in many respects, but it stimulated and economized the enterprise and energy, which, aided by England's geographical advantages and freedom from devastating wars, gave her the leadership of the world in the arts of manufacture and colonization, and though in a less marked degree, in agriculture. England has learnt lessons in agriculture from many countries, and especially the Netherlands. But on the whole, she has taught far more than she has learnt. And there is now no country except the Netherlands which can compare with her in the amount of produce per acre of fertile land, and no country in Europe which obtains nearly so high returns in proportion to the labor expended in getting them. Note 116. The chief merit of the system is that it enables the landlord to keep in his own hands the responsibility for that part, and only that part of the property which he can look after with but little trouble to himself and little vexation to his tenant, and the investment of which, though requiring both enterprise and judgment, does not demand constant supervision of minor details. His part consists of land, buildings, and permanent improvements, and averages in England 5 times that which the farmer has to supply himself. And he is willing to supply his part in the enterprise with this great capital at a net rent which seldom gives interest at as much as 3% on its cost. There is no other business in which a man can borrow what capital he wants at so low a rate, or can often borrow so large a part of his capital at any rate at all. The metayer indeed may be said to borrow an even larger share, but at a much higher rate. Note 117. The second merit of the English system, which partly follows from the first, is that it gives the landlord considerable freedom in the selection of an able and responsible tenant. So far as the management of land, as opposed to its ownership, goes, the accident of birth counts for less in England than in any other country of Europe. But we have already seen that even in modern England, the accident of birth counts for a good deal in the access to posts of command in all kinds of business, to the learned professions, and even to skilled manual trades. And it counts for somewhat more in English agriculture, for the good and bad qualities of landlords combine to prevent their selecting tenants on strictly commercial principles, and they do not very often go far afield for a new tenant. Note 118. 7. The number of people who had the opportunity of making a step forward in the arts of agriculture is very great. And since the different branches of agriculture differ from one another in general character less than those of manufacture, it might have been expected that new ideas in it would have followed one another quickly and have been speedily diffused. But on the contrary, progress has been slow. For the most enterprising agriculturists drift towards the town. Those who stay behind live more or less isolated lives. And as a result of natural selection and education, their minds have always been more staid than those of townsmen, and less ready to suggest or even to follow new paths. And further, though a manufacturer is nearly always safe in copying a plan that has worked well with his neighbor in the same trade, a farmer is not. For every farm has slight peculiarities of its own, so that the blind adoption of a plan that has worked well close by is likely to fail, and its failure encourages others in the belief that old and tried ways are the best. Again, the variety in agricultural detail makes the proper keeping of farming accounts very difficult. There are so many joint products and so many byproducts, so many complex and shifting relations of debtor and creditor between the several crops and methods of feeding, that an ordinary farmer, even if he were as fond of accounts as he is in fact averse to them, would have great difficulty in ascertaining otherwise than by a semi-instinctive guess what is the price that would just pay him to raise a certain amount of extra produce. He may know its prime cost with fair certainty, but he seldom knows its true total cost, and this increases the difficulty of reading quickly the teachings of experience and making progress by their aid. Note 119. And there is another difference between the mode of action of competition in agriculture and in manufacture. If one manufacturer is unenterprising, others may be able to step into the opening which leaves vacant. But when one landowner does not develop the resources of his land in the best way, others cannot make up for the deficiency without calling into play the tendency to diminishing return, so that his want of wisdom and enterprise makes the supply price a little higher than it would otherwise would be. Note 120. It is, however, true that the difference between the two cases is only one of degree, since the growth of any branch of manufacture may be retarded perceptibly by any falling off in the ability and enterprise of the leading firms engaged in it. The chief agricultural improvements have been made by landlords who have themselves been townsmen, or at least have associated a good deal with townsmen, and by manufacturers in trades subsidiary to agriculture. Though nature yields generally a less than proportionate return to an increased amount of labor of a given efficiency, man's part conforms generally to the law of increasing return, That is, it increases in aggregate efficiency more than in proportion to the number of workers in agriculture as well as in manufacture. Note 122. But yet, the economies of production on a large scale are not quite similar in the two cases. 8. Firstly, agriculture must be spread over the broad land. Raw material can be brought to the manufacturer for him to work on, but the agriculturist must seek his work. Again, the workers on the land must adapt their work to the seasons and can seldom confine themselves entirely to one class of work. And in consequence, agriculture, even under the English system, cannot move fast in the direction of the methods of manufacture. But yet, there are considerable forces tending to push it in that direction. The progress of invention is constantly increasing the number of serviceable but expensive machines, for most of which a small farmer can find employment during only a very short time. He may hire some of them, but there are many the use of which he can get only by cooperation with his neighbors. And the uncertainties of the weather prevent this plan from working very smoothly in practice. Note 1, 2, 3. Again, the farmer must go beyond the results of his own and his father's experience in order to keep abreast of the changes of the day. He should be able to follow the movements of agricultural science and practice closely enough to see their chief practical applications to his own farm. To do all this properly requires a trained and versatile mind, and a farmer who has these qualities could find time to direct the general course of the management of several hundred or even of several thousand acres. And the mere superintendence of his men's work in matters of detail is not a task fitting for him. The work which he ought to do is as difficult as that of a large manufacturer who would not spend his own strength on minute supervision, which he can easily hire subordinates to do. A farmer who can do this higher work must be wasting his strength on work that is beneath him, unless he employs many gangs of workmen, each of them under a responsible foreman. But there are not many farms which give scope for this, and there is therefore very little inducement for really able men to enter the business of farming. The best enterprise and ability of the country generally avoid agriculture and go to trades in which there is room for a man of first-rate ability to do nothing but high-class work, to do a great deal of it, and therefore to get high earnings of management. Note 1, 2, 4. If it be assumed, as is the modern fashion, that the farmer is not to work habitually with his men and to encourage them by his presence, it seems best for the economy of production that farms should be as large as is practicable under the existing conditions of land tenure, so as to give room for the use of highly specialized machines and for the exercise of great ability on the part of the farmer. But if a farm is not very large, and if, as is often the case, the farmer has no greater ability and activity of mind than is commonly to be found among the better class of working foremen in manufacturers, then it would be best for others, and in the long run for himself, that he should return to the old plan of working among his men. Perhaps also his wife might return to some of those lighter tasks in and near the farmhouse, which tradition ascribes to her. They require discretion and judgment. They are not inconsistent with education and culture. And combined with it, they would raise and not lower the tone of her life and her real claims to a good social position. There is some reason for thinking that the stern action of the principle of natural selection is now displacing those farmers who have not the faculty to do difficult head work and yet decline to do handwork. Their places are being taken by men of more than average natural ability, who with the help of modern education are rising from the ranks of laborers, who are quite able to manage the ordinary routine work of a model farm, and who are giving to it a new life and spirit by calling their men to come and work instead of telling them to go and work. Very large farms being left out of view, it is with rather small farms worked on these principles that the immediate future of English agriculture seems to lie. Small holdings have great advantages wherever so much care has to be given to individual plants that machinery is out of place. But modern applications of scientific methods are giving an increasing importance to that economy of technical skill which can be attained in a large nursery for choice flowers and fruits with several highly paid assistants. 9. We may next consider how far landlords will, in their own interest, adjust the size of holdings to the real needs of the people. Small holdings often require more expensive buildings, roads, and fences, and involve greater trouble and incidental expenses of management to the landlord in proportion to their acreage than do large holdings. And while a large farmer who has some rich land can turn poor soils to good account, small holdings will not flourish generally except on good soil. Note 125. Their gross rental per acre must therefore always be at a higher rate than that of large farms. But it is contended that, especially when land is heavily burdened by settlements, landlords are unwilling to incur the expense of subdividing farms unless they see their way to rents for small holdings that will give them, in addition to high profits on their outlay, a heavy insurance fund against the chance of having to throw the holdings together again, and that the rental for small holdings, especially for those of only a few acres, is extravagantly high in many parts of the country. Sometimes the prejudices of the landlord and his desire for undisputed authority make him positively refuse to sell or let land to persons who are not in harmony with him on social, political, or religious questions. It seems certain that evils of this kind have always been confined to a few districts and that they are rapidly diminishing, but they rightly attract much attention, for there is a public need in every district for small holdings as well as large, for allotments and large gardens, and generally for holdings so small that they can be worked by people who have some other occupation. Note 126. And lastly, though peasant proprietorship as a system is unsuited to the economic conditions of England, to her soil, her climate, and the temper of her people, yet there are a few peasant proprietors in England who are perfectly happy in this condition, and there are a few others who would buy small plots of land and would live happily on them if they could get just what they wanted where they wanted it. Their temper is such that they do not mind working hard and living sparely, provided they need call no one master. They love quiet and the slight excitement, and they have a great capacity for growing fond of land. Reasonable opportunity should be given to such people to invest their savings in small plots of land on which they may raise suitable crops with their own hands, and at the very least, the present grievous legal charges on the transfer of small plots should be diminished. Cooperation might seem likely to flourish in agriculture and to combine the economies of production on a large scale with many of the joys and the social gains of small properties. It requires habits of mutual trust and confidence, and unfortunately, the bravest and the boldest, and therefore the most truthful of the countrymen have always moved to the towns, and agriculturists are a suspicious race. But Denmark, Italy, Germany, and lastly Ireland have led the way in a movement which seems full of promise for organized cooperation in the handling of dairy produce, in the making of butter and cheese, in buying farmers' requisites, and in selling farmers' produce. And Britain is following in their wake. The movement is, however, of limited scope. It scarcely touches work in the field itself, as cooperation might combine more of the advantages of all systems of tenure. So the courtier system of Ireland often combined the disadvantages of all, but its worst evils and their causes have almost disappeared, and the economic elements of the problem are just now overshadowed by the political. We must therefore pass it by. Note 127. 10. The failures of the English system of land tenure in Ireland have brought into clear relief difficulties which are inherent in it, but which have been kept in the background in England by the conformity of the system to the business habits and the character of the people. The chief of these difficulties arise from the fact that while the system is competitive in its essence, the conditions of agriculture, even in England, offer a strong resistance to the full action of free competition. To begin with, there are special difficulties in ascertaining the facts on which that action must be based. We have just noticed the difficulty of keeping exact farming accounts. So this must be added that a farmer's calculations as to the rent which it is worth his while to undertake to pay are further hampered by the difficulty of deciding what is a normal harvest and a normal level of prices. For good and bad seasons come so much in cycles that many years are required to afford a trustworthy average of them. Note 128. And in those many years, the industrial environment is likely to have changed much. The local demand, the facilities for selling his own produce in distant markets, and those which assist competitors from a distance to sell their produce in his local markets may all have changed. The landlord, in determining what rent to accept, is met by this difficulty, and also by another arising out of variations in the standards of ability among farmers in different parts of the country. The producer's surplus, or English rent, of a farm is that excess which its produce yields over its expenses of cultivation, including normal profits to the farmer. It being assumed that that farmer's ability and enterprise are such as are normal for farms of that class in that place. The difficulty in view is to decide whether these last words are to be interpreted broadly or narrowly. It is clear that if a farmer falls below the standard of ability of his own district, if his only fault is in driving hard bargains, if his gross produce is small and his net produce even smaller in proportion, in such a case, the landlord acts in the interest of all when he hands over the farm to a more competent tenant who will pay better wages, obtain a much higher net produce, and pay a somewhat higher rent. On the other hand, when the local standard of normal ability and enterprise is low, it is not clearly right from an ethical point of view, nor is it clearly in the business interest of the landlord in the long run that he should endeavor to take to himself a greater rent than can be paid by a farmer who reaches that standard, even though it could be obtained by importing a farmer from another district in which the standard is higher. Note 129. Closely related to this question is one as to the freedom the tenant should have to develop the natural capabilities of his land at his own risk, with the understanding that if he is successful, he is to retain something more than mere normal profits on his enterprise. So far as minor improvements go, this difficulty is in a great measure met by long leases. These have done much for Scotland, but they have disadvantages of their own. And as has been often observed, the English tenant has always something of a lease, even when he has no lease. And again, there are traces of metayage, even in tenures which are thoroughly English. When seasons and markets are favorable to the farmer, he pays his full rent and avoids making demands on the landlord that might set him thinking whether the rent ought not to be raised. When things go badly, the landlord, partly from sympathy and partly as a matter of business, makes temporary remissions of rent and bears the expense of repairs, etc., which he would otherwise have left for the farmer. There may thus be much give and take between landlord and tenant without any change of nominal rents. Note 130. Custom has always given to the English tenant some partial security for compensation for improvements made by him, and legislation has recently caught up custom and even passed it. The tenant is now practically secure against the raising of his rent on account of increased yield of the soil due to improvements of a reasonable nature made by himself, and on leaving, he can claim compensation for the unexhausted value of them to be fixed by arbitration. Note 131. Finally, a word may be said as to private and public interests with regard to open spaces in towns. Wakefield and the American economists have taught us how a sparsely inhabited new district is enriched by the advent of every new settler. The converse truth is that a closely peopled district is impoverished by everyone who adds a new building or raises an old one higher. The want of air and light, of peaceful repose out of doors for all ages, and of healthy play for children exhausts the energies of the best blood of England, which is constantly flowing towards our large towns. By allowing vacant spaces to be built on recklessly, we are committing a great blunder from a business point of view. For the sake of a little material wealth, we are wasting those energies which are the factors of production of all wealth. We are sacrificing those ends towards which material wealth is only a means. Note 132. End of chapter 10. Chapter 10 of Principles of Economics, Book 6, Part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Notes for Marshall, Principles of Economics, Book 6, Chapter 10. Note 104. The sleeping partner may be a village community, but recent investigations, especially those of Mr. Seaborn, have given cause for believing that the communities were not often free and ultimate owners of the land. For a summary of the controversy as to the part which the village community has played in the history of England, the reader is referred to the first chapter of Ashley's Economic History. Mention has already been made of the ways in which primitive forms of divided ownership of the land hindered progress. Note.
Okay, thank you, Alfred. Okay, now I'm going to close the seance and I'm going to send your ass back to hell. Spirit be gone, Alfred Marshall. Back to hell with ye till I call ye forth again. Okay. All right. Hey, ladies and gents. So, the second half of this is going to be another analysis of a book I read. And the name of this, well, I'll give props where props are due in a minute, but basically reading a lot of this off of my blog. If you want to check that out, it's charleslamson.blogspot.com. Tons of good stuff there about business administration, business corporate communications, got organizational communications, communications with an emphasis on promotions, such as public relations and that sort of thing, marketing, you name it, finance, economics, it's all there. Developing strategies. We're talking about leading human resources. We're talking about leadership strategies, management tips, changing style. One of the most, by the way, caller lines are wide open. If you want to call in, be a part of the big show, please feel free. That number be 657-383-1825. 657-383-1825. Caller lines are wide open. Audience participation is definitely welcome. Changing style. Give us recommendations on which way you would like the show to move in. Topics you would like to hear, or questions and comments about topics that have been covered thus far. Changing style. Developing strategies. Okay, one of the most difficult changes to make is a complete change in the style of a person, yet industry invests many millions of dollars annually for training and development programs that concentrate on changing the style of its leaders. As Fiedler suggested, and I quote, "A person's leadership style reflects the individual's basic motivational and need structure. At best, it takes 1, 2, or 3 years of intensive psychotherapy to effect lasting changes in personality structure. It is difficult to see how we can change in more than a few cases an equally important set of core values in a few hours of lectures and role-playing, or even in the course of a more intensive training program of 1 or 2 weeks," end quote. Fiedler's point is well taken. It is indeed difficult to effect changes in the styles of managers overnight. Although not completely hopeless, it is a slow and expensive process that requires creative planning and patience. In fact, Rensis-Likert found that it takes from 3 to 7 years, depending on the size and complexity of the organization, to implement a new management theory effectively. Haste is self-defeating because of the anxieties and stresses it creates. There is no substitute for ample time to enable the members of an organization to reach a level of skillful and easy habitual use of the new leadership style. What generally happens in current training and development is that managers are encouraged to adopt certain normative behavior styles. In our culture, these styles are usually high relationship, low task, or high task, high relationship styles. Although we agree that there is a growing tendency for these two syllables to be more effective than the high task, low relationship, or low relationship, low task styles, we recognize that this is not universally the case, even in our own culture. In fact, it is often not the case even within a certain work group. Most people might respond favorably to the high relationship styles, but a few might react in a negative manner, taking advantage of what they consider a soft touch. As a result, certain individuals will have to be handled in a different way. Perhaps they will respond only to close supervision, a high task, low relationship style. Thus, it is unrealistic to think that any of these styles can be successfully applied everywhere. In addition to considering application, it is questionable whether every leader can adapt to one normative style. Most training and development programs do not recognize these two considerations. Considerably, a foreman who has been operating as a task-oriented authoritarian leader for many years is encouraged to change style, get in step with the times. Upon returning from the training program, the foreman will probably try to utilize some of the new relationship-oriented techniques. As long as things are running smoothly, there is no difficulty in using them. The minute an important issue or a crisis develops, however, the foreman tends to revert to the old basic style and facilitates between the new relationship-oriented style and the old task-oriented style, which has the force of habit behind it. The problem is that the style the foreman has used for a long time is not compatible with the new concepts. This idea was supported in a study that General Electric conducted at one of its turbine and generator plants. Dehydration is the enemy, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so we're talking about the study at the General Electric conducted a study at one of its turbine and generator plants. In this study, the leadership styles of about 90 foremen were analyzed and rated as democratic, authoritarian, or mixed. In discussing these findings, Saul W. Gellerman reported that, quote, the lowest morale in the plant was found among those men whose foremen were rated between the democratic and authoritarian extremes. The GE research team felt that these foremen may have varied inconsistently in their tactics, permissive at one moment and hard-fisted the next, in a way that left their men frustrated and unable to anticipate how they could be treated. The naturally autocratic supervisor who is exposed to human relations training may behave in exactly such a manner, a pattern which will probably make him even harder to work for than he was before being enlightened, end quote. In summary of this little section I've covered so far, changing the style of managers is a difficult process and one that takes considerable time. Expecting miracles overnight will only lead to frustration and uneasiness for both managers and their employees. Consequently, we recommend that change in overall management style in an organization be planned and implemented on a long-term basis so that expectations can be realistic for all involved. Changes in expectations versus changes in style. Using the feedback model, I drew a little figure of it. If you want to check that out, let's hit the blog. We can begin to explain why it is so difficult to make changes in leader style in a short period of time. When a person behaves in a motivating situation, that behavior becomes a new input to the individual's inventory of past experience. The earlier in life this input occurs, the greater its potential effect on future behavior. At that time, this behavior represents a larger portion of the individual's total past experience than the same behavior input will later in life. In addition, the longer a behavior is reinforced, the more patterned it becomes and the more difficult it is to change. That is why it is easier to make personality changes early in life. As a person gets older, more time and new experiences are necessary to affect a change in behavior. Changes in behavior are much more difficult and time consuming than are changes in knowledge and attitudes, if force is not a factor. Because changes in expectations in reality are changes in knowledge and attitudes. These can be implemented more rapidly than can changes in style. In fact, changes in expectations may be accomplished merely by having leaders sit down and clarify what their behavior will be with the individuals involved. Once they understand their leader's style, followers can more easily adjust their expectations to it. Recognizing some of the limitations of training and development programs that concentrate only on changing leadership styles, Fiedler suggested that it would seem more promising at this time to teach the individual to recognize the conditions under which he can perform best and to modify the situation to suit his leadership style. This philosophy, which he calls organizational engineering, is based on the following assumption. Quote, it is almost always easier to change a man's work environment than it is to change his personality or his style of relating to others, end quote. Although we basically agree with Fiedler's assumption, we feel that changes in both are needed and both are difficult but possible. Fiedler is helpful, however, in suggesting ways in which a leadership situation can be modified to fit the leader's style. These suggestions are based on his leadership contingency model. That model lists three major situational variables that seem to determine whether a given situation is favorable or unfavorable to leaders. 1. Leader-member relations. Leaders' personal relations with the members of their group. 2. Position power. The power and authority that their position provides. And 3. Task structure. The degree of structure, routine versus challenging, in the task that the group has been assigned to perform. The changes in each of these variables that Fiedler recommended can be expressed in a task or relationship terms. Each change tends to favor either a task-oriented or a relationship-oriented leader. Okay. Moving on. With changes such as these, Okay, Fiedler suggested that the situational variables, changes such as these. I kind of skipped over a table I created here. I don't know if, cool. Each change tends to favor, okay, right. The changes in each of these, all right, so. With changes such as these, Fiedler suggested that the situational variables confronting leaders can be modified to fit their style. He recognized, however, that the success of organizational engineering depends on training individuals to be able to diagnose their own leadership style and the other situational variables. Only when they have accurately interpreted these variables can they determine whether any changes are necessary. If changes are needed, leaders do not necessarily have to initiate any in their own particular situation. They might prefer to transfer to a situation that better fits their style. In this new environment, no immediate changes may be necessary. Okay, moving on. Moving on. Readiness defined. Readiness in situational leadership is defined as the extent to which a follower demonstrates the ability and willingness to accomplish a specific task. Okay. People tend to be at different levels of readiness depending on the task they are being asked to do. Readiness is not a personal characteristic. It is not an evaluation of a person's traits, values, age, and so on. Readiness is how ready a person is to perform a particular task. This concept of readiness has to do with specific situations, not with any total sense of readiness. All persons tend to be more or less ready in relation to a specific task, function, or objective that a leader is attempting to accomplish. Okay. Thus, a salesperson may be very responsible in securing new sales, but very casual about completing the paperwork necessary to close on a sale. As a result, okay. So as a result, it is appropriate for the manager to leave the salesperson alone in terms of closing on sales, but to supervise closely in terms of paperwork until the salesperson can start to do well in that area too. In addition to assessing the level of readiness of individuals within a group, a leader may have to assess the readiness level of the group as a group, particularly if the group interacts frequently in the same work area, as happens with students in the classroom. Thus, a teacher may find that a class as a group may be at one level of readiness in a particular area, but a student within that group may be at a different level. When the teacher is one-to-one with the student, the teacher may have to behave very differently than with working with the class as a group. In reality, the teacher may find a number of students at various readiness levels. For example, the teacher may have one student who is not doing the assigned work regularly, and when the work is turned in, it is poorly organized and not very well done. The teacher may have to initiate some structure and supervise that student closely. Another student, however, may be doing good work but may be insecure and shy. With that student, the teacher may not have to engage in much task behavior in terms of schoolwork, but may need to be supportive, to engage in two-way communication, and to help facilitate the student's interaction with others in the class. Still, another student may be competent and confident in the schoolwork and thus can be given minimum assistance. So leaders have to understand that they may have to behave differently one-on-one with members of their group from the way they do with the group as a whole. The two major components of readiness are ability and willingness. Ability is the knowledge, experience, and skill that an individual or group brings to a particular task or activity. The components of ability are demonstrated and defined as follows. Knowledge is a demonstrated understanding of a task. Skill is a demonstrated proficiency in a task. Experience is a demonstrated ability gained from performing a task. When considering the ability level of others, one must be task specific. A person who has a PhD in music and 20 years of professional experience playing the piano may be of little help in the design of a new jet engine. It is essential to focus on the specific outcome desired and to consider the ability of the followers in light of that outcome. Willingness is the extent to which an individual or group has the confidence, commitment, and motivation to accomplish a specific task. The components of willingness are demonstrated confidence, commitment, and motivation. They are defined as follows. Confidence is demonstrated assurance in the ability to perform a task. Commitment is demonstrated duty to perform a task. Motivation is demonstrated desire to perform a task. Willingness is only one word that describes the issue. Sometimes it isn't so much that people are really unwilling, it is just that they have never done a specific task before. Perhaps they do not have any experience with it, so they're insecure or afraid. In general, if it is an issue of never having done something, the problem is insecurity. The term unwilling might be most appropriate when, for some reason, the individuals have slipped or lost some of their commitment and motivation. It might imply that they are regressing. Even though the concepts of ability and willingness are different, it is important to remember that they are an interactive influence system. This means that a significant change in one will affect the whole. The extent to which followers bring willingness into a specific situation affects the use of their current ability, and it affects the extent to which they will grow and develop competence and ability. Similarly, the amount of knowledge, experience, and skill brought to a specific task will often affect confidence, commitment, and motivation. Readiness levels are the different combinations of ability and willingness that people bring to each task. Okay. Okay, so I go on to describe a continuum of follower resistance. Okay, this continuum of follower resistance. With this print live and everything. So I may have a little. Let's see if it'll translate well. Just using audio, no charts and graphs or anything. But like I said, I do actually have these figures. If you want to check out the visuals, they're there at the blog, charleslanson.blogspot.com. So it's the greatest blog of all time, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see here. So the continuum of follower readiness can be divided into 4 levels. Each represents a different combination of follower ability and willingness or confidence. At readiness level 1, or R1 on this continuum, you have unable and unwilling. The follower is unable and lacks commitment and motivation, or unable and insecure. The follower is unable and lacks confidence. At readiness level 2, R2, you have unable but willing. The follower lacks ability but is motivated and making an effort, or unable but confident. The follower lacks ability but is confident as long as the leader is there to provide guidance. Readiness level 3, you got R3, able but unwilling. The follower has the ability to perform the task, but is not willing to use that ability, or able but insecure. The follower has the ability to perform the task, but is insecure or apprehensive about doing it alone. At readiness level 4, R4, you have the able and willing. The follower has the ability to perform and is committed or able and confident. The follower has the ability to perform and is confident about doing it. So R4 is ideally what we want, but always strive for. Ron Campbell of the Center for Leadership Studies has expanded the continuum of the follower readiness to include behavioral indicators of the 4 readiness levels. Each level represents a different combination of follower ability and willingness or confidence. Okay. Now this is getting really esoteric here. But I think some of it will translate pretty well. So let's see here. Because it is important to assess whether a person is unable and insecure, Campbell further refined these readiness indicators to help differentiate between the 2 R1 readiness states, readiness level 1, specifically an unable and unwilling R1. Unable and unwilling R1 would exhibit defensive, argumentative, complaining behaviors, late completion of tasks, performance only to exact request, intense frustration. And unable and insecure R1, readiness level 1, would have body language expressing discomfort, furrowed brow, shoulders lowered, leaning back, confused, unclear behavior, concern over possible outcomes, fear of failure. The following sections will present indicators for the 3 remaining readiness levels. R2 readiness level 2 indicators are indicated in specifically and unable but willing or confident R2 would speak quickly and intensely, seek clarity, nod head, make yes I know type comments, seem eager, listen carefully, answer questions superficially, accept tasks, act quickly, be preoccupied with end results rather than incremental steps. R3's indicators are specifically, R3 is able but unwilling. These indicators are being hesitant or resistant. They feel over-obligated and overworked. They seek reinforcement. They're concerned performance is somehow punishing. Enable but insecure R3 would question own ability, focus on potential problems, lack self-esteem, encourage leader to stay involved. R4's indicators that once again R4 readiness level 4, that's able and willing or confident. R4 would keep the boss informed of task progress, make efficient use of resources, be responsible and results oriented, be knowledgeable, share information to streamline operational tasks, be willing to help others, share creative ideas, take charge of tasks, complete responsibilities on time. These indicators are important clues to follower readiness. Just as a physician must use clues in diagnosing patient illness, leaders must be alert for clues in follower behavior as a critical step to correctly diagnosing readiness. All right, moving on. Okay. Man, just been hydrated. Let's see here. Oh yeah, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I want to give props where props are due. In this analysis, it's an analysis of a book I read earlier in the year. So I'm borrowing heavily from this in this presentation here. And the name of the book is, this work is basically an analysis of. The name of it is Management of Organizational Behavior, Leading Human Resources. 8th edition, 2001. Paul Hersey, Kenneth H. Blanchard, Dewey E. Johnson are the writers. So, yeah, I would highly recommend it. I actually, as far as textbooks go, I loved it. So, it was very, very good if you're into the behavioral sciences, if you're into this sort of thing. All right. Leadership perception and the impact of power. The concepts of leadership and power have generated lively interest, debate, and often confusion throughout the evolution of management thought. The concept of power is closely related to the concept of leadership. For power is one of the means by which a leader influences the behavior of followers. Given this integral relationship between leadership and power, leaders must not only assess their leader behavior in order to understand how they actually influence other people, but they must also examine their possession and use of power. Power defined. So, in an earlier episode, we defined leadership as an attempt to influence another individual or group and concluded that leadership is an influence process. Power is influence potential, the resource that enables a leader to gain compliance or commitment from others. Despite its critical importance, power is a subject that is often avoided because power can have its steamy side, and many people want to wish it away and pretend it is not even there. But power is a real-world issue. Leaders who understand and know how to use power are more effective than those who do not or will not use power. To successfully influence the behavior of others, the leader should understand the impact of power on the various leadership styles. In today's world, many sources of power within organizations have been legislated, negotiated, or administered away. Leaders now have less of some types of power to draw from, so it is important to use effectively what is available. Because power bases drive leadership styles, using them appropriately can enhance your effectiveness as a leader. In spite of widespread usage of the term power in the management literature, there are many definitions. James Hillman reports that power's quote, rather innocent definition is simply the agency to act, to do, to be, coming from the Latin potere, to be able. Power can be defined as sheer potency or potentiality, not the doing, but the capability to do, end quote. David C. McClelland and David H. Burnham have defined power as, quote, influencing others, end quote. John B. Miner defined power as, quote, the ability to induce a person to do something he or she would not otherwise have done, end quote. Miner goes on to write, quote, influence is a broader concept referring to anything a person does to alter the behavior, attitudes, values, feelings, and such of another person. Power is thus one form of influence, end quote. Stephen P. Robbins suggests, quote, power refers to a capacity that A has to influence the behavior of B so that B does something that he or she would not otherwise do. This definition implies one, a potential that need not be actualized to be effective, two, a dependence relationship, and three, that B has some discretion over his or her own behavior, end quote. We will use M.F. Rogers' simple definition of power as the potential for influence. Thus, power is a resource that may or may not be used. The use of power resulting in a change in the probability that a person or group will adopt the desired behavioral change is defined as influence. Accepting Rogers' definition, we make the following distinction between leadership and power. As was suggested in an earlier section, leadership is defined as the process of influencing the activities of an individual or a group in efforts toward accomplishing a goal in a given situation. Therefore, leadership is simply any attempt to influence power. Power is a leader's influence potential. It is the resource that enables a leader to influence. Power, an eroding concept. So, if power is defined as influence potential, how does one describe authority? Authority is a particular type of power that has its origin in the position that a leader occupies. Thus, authority is the power that is legitimized by virtue of an individual's former role in a social organization. Hundreds of years ago, serfs had no power. Kings and queens had all the power. Their positions gave them ultimate authority. For years, managers were almost like kings and queens. They could make all the decisions. If they did not like the way you looked or the way you combed your hair, they could fire you. And workers could do very little to stop such arbitrary action. Today, that is no longer the case. Position power and personal power. One of the characteristics of leadership is that leaders exercise power. Amitai Etzioni discussed the difference between position power and personal power. His distinction resulted from his concept of power as the ability to induce or influence behavior. He claimed that power is derived from an organizational office, personal influence, or both. Individuals who are able to induce other individuals to do a certain job because of their position in the organization are considered to have position power. Individuals who derive their power from their followers are considered to have personal power. Some individuals can have both power and personal power. Where do managers get the position power that is available to them? Although Etzioni would argue that it comes from the organizational office of a manager, we feel it comes from the above and therefore is not inherent in the office. Managers occupying positions in an organization may have more or less position power than their predecessor or someone else in a similar position in the same organization. Position power is the extent to which those people to whom managers report are willing to delegate authority and responsibility down to them. So position power tends to flow down in an organization. It is not a matter of the offices having power, This is not to say that leaders do not have any impact on how much power they accrue. They certainly do. The confidence and trust they develop with the people above them will often determine the willingness of upper management to delegate down to them. And remember, whatever power is delegated downward can be taken back. We have all seen this occur on occasions when managers still have the same responsibilities, but all of a sudden their authority to distribute rewards and sanctions to get the job done in the way they once did is taken away. Personal power is the extent to which followers respect, feel good about, and are committed to their leader, and to which they see their own goals as being satisfied by the goals of their leader. In other words, personal power is the extent to which people are willing to follow a leader. As a result, personal power in an organizational setting comes from below, from the followers, and so flows up in an organization. Thus, we must be careful when we say that some leaders are charismatic or have personal power that flows from them. Personal power is not inherent in the leader. If it were, managers with personal power could take over any department and have the same commitment and rapport they had in their last department. We know that they cannot. Although managers certainly can influence the amount of personal power they have by the way they treat their people, it is a volatile kind of power. It can be taken away rapidly by followers. Make a few dramatic mistakes and see how many people are willing to follow. Personal power is a day-to-day phenomenon. It can be earned and it can be taken away. Etzioni suggested that the best situation for leaders is when they have both personal power and position power. But in some cases, it is not possible to build a relationship on both. Then the question becomes whether it is more important to have personal power or position power. Happiness and human relations have been culturally reinforced over the past several decades. With this emphasis, most people would pick personal power as being the most important. But there may be another side of the coin. In his 16th century treatise, The Prince, Machiavelli presented an interesting viewpoint when he raised the question of whether it is better to have a relationship based on love, personal power, or fear, position power. Machiavelli, as did Etzioni, contended that it is best to be both loved and feared. If, however, one cannot have both, he suggested that a relationship based on love alone tends to be volatile, short-lived, and easily terminated when there is no fear of retaliation. On the other hand, a relationship based on fear tends to be longer lasting because the individual must be ready to incur the sanction, pay the price before terminating the relationship. This is a difficult concept for many people to accept. One of the most difficult roles for leaders, whether they be a supervisor, teacher, or parent, is disciplining someone about whom they care. Yet, to be effective, leaders sometimes have to sacrifice short-term friendship for long-term respect if they are interested in the growth and development of the people with whom they are working. Machiavelli warned, however, that one should be careful that fear does not lead to hatred. For hatred often evokes overt behavior in terms of retaliation, undermining, and attempts to overthrow. Okay, going to take a quick break. Shall return right after this. I'm going to leave you in the very capable hands of the Tibetan monks. Thank you, Tibetan monks. All right, in summary of this little section here, position power can be thought of as the authority which is delegated down to use rewards and sanctions. Personal power is the cohesiveness, commitment, and rapport between leaders and followers. It is also affected by the extent to which followers see their own goals as being the same, similar to, or at least dependent upon, accomplishment of the leader's goals. Although personal and position power are distinct, they are an interacting influence system. Often, followers are affected by their perception of the leader's ability to provide rewards, punishments, and sanctions, and of the leader's influence up the organization. Also, the extent to which people above you in the organization are willing to delegate position power is often dependent on their perception of the follower's commitment to you. So it is not sufficient just to have either position or personal power alone. You need to work at gaining both. Selling within your own organization. It is important to keep in mind that no matter where you are within your organization, you are trying to influence people. If you are managing, you can use both position power and personal power to influence the people who report directly to you. When attempting to influence your supervisor, senior executives, and associates, however, you must depend almost exclusively on personal power. You must learn to develop rapport through personal power, because it is through this trust and confidence that an effective relationship can be built. Keep in mind that power is a real world issue. People who understand and know how to use power are more effective than those who do not or will not. Recognition of the fact that all managers are in the business of selling is an important aspect of this understanding. Okay. Well, additional bases of power. Although position power and personal power are important and useful concepts in examining power, they are limited because they force you to divide the pie into just two pieces. R.L. Peabody named 4 categories of power on the basis of statements of questionnaire respondents in a police department, a welfare office, and an elementary school. You got power of legitimacy, laws, rules, policies, of position, of competence, such as professional and technical expertise, and of person. A study by A.C. Philly and A.J. Grimes identified 11 reasons why an individual would seek a decision from another on various work-related matters in a professional organization. These reasons, from most frequently to least frequently mentioned, were responsibility and function. The person is responsible for the particular matter. Formal authority, the person is in a position to make decisions generally. Control of resources, the person controls money, information, and so on. Collegial, a group of peers has the right to be consulted. Manipulation, the person can get the decision made in the manner desired. Default or avoidance, the person is available and will deal with the problem. Bureaucratic rules, the rules specify the person to consult. Traditional rules, custom, tradition, or seniority, specify the person to consult. Equity, the person is a fair decision maker. Friendship, the person is personally liked. And expertise, the person has superior knowledge of the subject. Many other power-based classification systems have been developed, but the framework devised by J.R.P. French and B. Raven appears to be the most widely accepted. They propose that there are 5 bases of power: coercive power, expert power, legitimate power, referent power, and reward power. Later, Raven, collaborating with W. Kruglansky, identified a 6th power base: information power. Hersey and Marshall Goldsmith modified some of the definitions of French, Raven, and Kruglansky and proposed a 7th base of power: connection power. The perception of power. In the following discussion of power bases, we use the word perceived in such instances as coercive power, the perceived ability to provide sanctions. We do this because the key issue in the concept of power is that it is not based on the reality of how much power the manager has, but rather on the follower's perception of that power. Truth and reality evoke no behavior. All behavior is based on people's perception and interpretation of truth and reality. For example, when a couple has a fight, it does not matter whether the cause was real or imagined. It was just as much of a fight. It is the perception others hold about power that gives people the ability to influence. We operate using psychological maps. The caution that one must make is that no matter how hard we work or how detailed our psychological map, no matter how much information and specificity we have in our psychological map, the map is not the territory. The closer and closer we match our psychological map to the territory, however, the higher the probability that we will be able to operate effectively within that territory. Get the information out. People must not only perceive you as having power, they must also see you as able and willing to use it. It is not enough to have access to power. You have to let people know you are willing to use it. Information has value only when you get it out to the end user in a fashion that can be understood and accepted. If you don't blow your own horn, somebody else will use it as a spittoon. Consider a father examining his son's report card and suffering mild cardiac tremors as he sees a solid column of D's. Outraged that a product of his genes could so disgrace the family, he confronts his son. Dave, this just won't do. I can't tolerate these grades. And if you don't show me an immediate turnaround, you're going to be grounded. 6 weeks later, Dave brings home another report card. This time, the D's are written in red ink with exclamation points. The father says, David, get in here. I'm really upset, and now you have no choice at all. Hit those books hard, or you're definitely going to be grounded. Next time, it's the same, except that the teacher has added some pointed remarks about Dave's inattentive behavior in class. Dave's father turns crimson, crumples his beer can, and shouts, David, Ralph, this is it. Last chance city. You're in real trouble with the old man now. What has Dave learned? That his father, who has the ability to ground him, will not use the power. Because of his father's reluctance to follow through with his threatened punishments, Dave knows that all he has to do is take the heat for 6 minutes and he's off the hook for 6 weeks. Power is a matter of perception. Use it or lose it. Readiness, styles, and power bases. The relationship between readiness, leadership style, and the power base that drives that style will be explained from the aspects of managing and leading. Coercive power, the perceived ability to provide sanctions, punishment, or consequences for not performing. Followers at readiness level 1, R1, characterized as unable and unwilling or insecure, need guidance. Too much supportive behavior with people who are not performing may be perceived as permissive or as rewarding the lack of performance. Without some coercive behavior to drive the telling style, attempts to influence will be ineffective. Followers need to know that if they do not respond, there may be some costs, sanctions, or other consequences. These may take the form of a reprimand, cut in pay, transfer, demotion, or even dismissal. Managers often erode their coercive power by not following through. They may have the ability to impose sanctions, but for one reason or another, be unwilling to do so. This reluctance to use sanctions can result in a loss of power. Another way to erode coercive power is by not differentiating in the use of sanctions on the basis of performance. If people feel they will be punished, regardless of performance, coercive power has little impact. It is even possible to talk coercive power away.
90 seconds.
A manager begins a performance appraisal interview with a low performer by saying, "Now look, both of us know that you've been here for over 20 years and I can't fire you." In just a few words, the manager has stripped away any coercive power the follower might have perceived. Okay, ladies and gents, so this is the end of the big show. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Next show, we're going to pick things up right there where I left. Oh, shoot. Where we left.
50 seconds.
Right where we left off. Oh, wow. Yeah, and we're going to be talking about bases of power. But thanks for tuning in. And I'm also going to channel the spirit of Alfred Marshall again. So it's going to be great. Definitely want to stay tuned for that. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.